Does it ever feel like you, the founder, are the biggest thing holding your own company back from its next level of growth? Well, that is called the Founder Bottleneck. And my guest today, Jeff Klaumann of Collective 54, is an expert in helping businesses break through it. As an entrepreneurial COO who's advised hundreds of founders, Jeff shares two of the biggest warning signs that you're becoming that bottleneck: time and money. So if you're feeling stuck, this conversation's your roadmap. This is Freeing the Founder. I, of course, want to get into this problem because it is pervasive. It is a very, very real thing. But Jeff, I'd love to understand your origin story. How did you first link up with Collective 54? What drew you to your founder and this organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose I have a very non-linear career. I have had a lot of zigs and zags, but about 10 years ago, I had kind of a wake-up call of recognizing that I had been spending so much time in big companies, but in my heart of hearts, I was actually an entrepreneur, and I needed to be in a different spot. And that wake-up call really led me to joining Collective 54 before it was anything. We have a rather fun story in late 2019 when Greg Alexander and I met. Collective 54 was nothing more than an idea and a big, thick PowerPoint deck of what we thought it could be. And we got to know each other. And I was in another pro-serve firm that I'd started with some partners. And he said, "Hey, do you have the stomach to start another firm?" And I said, "Yeah, let's do it." So, that was 2019. Of course, here we are today with, hundreds of members, and we've had, I think, about 50 exits that we've helped. So members that have sold their firms. So kind of the vision is being realized.
Yep, that's a story that I resemble, but that's a chat for another day. Let's dig into the founder bottleneck itself. What is it exactly, and why is this such a significant problem to be aware of?
Yeah, the founder bottleneck is when the founder or co-founders, they really become the bottleneck of the firm. They become the constraint that slows things down and kind of gets in the way of scaling. And ultimately, the founder bottleneck can prevent a firm from selling and having a successful exit. So scaling a firm is far too much work for one person. But what happens in almost every single firm and founder that I've spoken with, after I suppose about 1,000 of them so far in my career, is everybody starts their firm because they're brilliant in some domain. They are great at software engineering, or they're great at sales consulting or something like that. So they start a firm, and then before you know it, they have some clients and they're delivering work, and they need more help, and they hire some people, and then one morning they wake up and they're like, "Wow, I have a company now. Now what?" It's kind of that thing where what got you to where you were won't get you to where you want to go. Because often in those early days, the firm is kind of a hero style firm where the founder is the magic. And then the founder has some helpers around the founder that are getting the work done. Well, what happens is if you don't consciously really address the founder bottleneck, you actually start to constrain, and the firm actually starts to suffer. So it really is kind of an interesting cycle that I've seen, play out hundreds and hundreds of times with our members. So I haven't seen a single firm that doesn't, or that can avoid the founder bottleneck.
It's one of those invisible ceilings. You're going to get there eventually, and you're going to say, "Ouch."
Yeah, absolutely.
Jeff, one of the books that I'm revisiting, I read Rocket Fuel many years ago, and I'm revisiting it now. And it's really interesting how sometimes you go back to books 1 or 2 years or 3 years later, and it's just like there's new epiphanies, there's new takeaways. Anyhow, you sounded exactly like the first few chapters as I was listening to this audio book this morning. But let's dig deeper into the symptoms of the founder bottleneck. How would this manifest in the company?
Yeah, it really shows up in kind of two big warning signs. And one is time and the other is money. Time is, as we know, there's only so many hours in the day, and you can't suddenly start working 20 hours a day and think that's sustainable. So, scaling a firm is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And what, if we kind of go back to that story of founders starting a firm and kind of being hero style, you can't just keep being a hero and actually scale the firm. So often the founder becomes spread thin. So instead of being able to just focus on winning new business, suddenly now we have finances, and now we have to recruit people, and now I've got to manage people, and like all of these things start adding up. In the early days, you just got to sell work, and then you got to deliver work. But as the firm starts to scale, there's more to it. So time and not having enough of it is a very early indicator of the founder bottleneck. And the second is money. When you're running a hero style firm, that founder's likely winning all of the business, or maybe they're the brilliant delivery person. But at some point, there's this revenue plateau. You can't just keep, selling more and more work to, people in your network or through referrals. And suddenly that starts to constrain growth. So time and money are the ones that the warning signs I see over and over again.
There's an idea in a term that you shared earlier, hero with 1,000 helpers, sometimes referred to as genius with 1,000 helpers. And I remember many years ago when I first shared that with a founder, I remember personally feeling, ouch, am I being abrasive? Over the past couple of years, I've come to a point of acceptance in that it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a reality that we face. And it's, in my mind, it's both simple and complex in that it is what it is. It represents the words represent the meaning, but complex in that it has very profound impacts on culture. At least this is my ideology. So Jeff, I'd love to understand from you, genius or genius with 1,000 helpers or hero with 1,000 helpers, what are the cultural impacts to the team if this problem is prevalent?
Yeah, this is a great one. Well, first off, like we kind of talked about before, often this is, when you have this kind of approach of genius or a hero, at some point, the growth just plateaus. Everything can't be dependent on that founder. So if every single decision, has to run through that founder, he or she is going to burn out. It's just a fact of life. And of course, in that burnout, that impacts the overall culture of the firm. You can imagine somebody who's burning out, they become short, they're overwhelmed, they can't keep all the plates spinning type of thing. And that doesn't just hurt them. Of course it hurts them, but it also hurts the people around them, those 1,000 helpers, because suddenly they can't get their part of the work done. They can't move the ball down the field because they're, dependent on the founder. The other aspect that starts to happen is if you have that kind of, sometimes I've described this as kind of instead of a top-down pyramid type organization, it looks like a hub and spoke where the founder is in the middle and all of the helpers are around that founder. Well, at some point, all of the independent thinking, the speed, the innovation, all of those things that you hired these brilliant people for, it just goes away because now they're anchored to whatever the founder says. And of course, that's when people leave. That's when they, their careers start to stall out. They, feel stifled. They get frustrated. They're not advancing in their own skills. They're doing the same thing over and over again, or they can't make a move without the founder. Suddenly they're not growing. And that's when people leave. So it really can destroy the firm. And unfortunately, I've seen this happen with some members that I've met with.
Yeah, seen it too. So where do you start? How do you solve this $1 million question, really?
Yeah. I think it starts first with some recognition that oftentimes the identity of the founder and the firm are intertwined. So there is some of that, sensitivity that you mentioned, and you just have to recognize it because, their brilliance is what got the firm off the ground. Their brilliance to sell and deliver great work is, part of their personal identity along with the firm identity. But, you just have to recognize that sensitivity to begin with. But from there, I think it really starts with a self-assessment of the founder. And, if the founder has some strong leaders around them, it's, not trying to define that the founder only does these things and every founder does these same 5 things. That's the wrong approach. It's instead, kind of doing a self-assessment and, what are you great at and what do you love doing? And what are those things that you hate doing that you're not good at? What are those things that suck energy from you? What are the energy vampires out there that, when that thing comes up on your to-do list, you cringe? It starts with that because you want to put everybody in the right spot to be successful. And that includes the founder. The founder needs to be thinking about the business, further out than, kind of the day to day. But there's a bunch of things that go along with running a firm that, not everybody needs to be great at everything. And unfortunately, we have that kind of mentality that we need to focus on strengthening our weakness. That's a losing proposition. Focus on your strengths. Focus on the things you love doing. Scaling a firm's a marathon. Don't think that you can run a marathon if you hate what you're doing. So it really does start with that self-assessment.
Jeff, I'm so glad that you started there. You really started high level as opposed to saying, well, the founder just needs to delegate. Sure, delegation is a big part of it. It's a crucial part of it. But you actually started with the founder, and through to your hub and spoke analogy, you worked your way outwards. Why is that important? Let me ask that question, and I have a couple of follow-up. Why is it important to start with the founder? And as you had mentioned, their key contributions, and others would use the term unique abilities.
Right. Yeah, because you want to make sure you're delegating the right things. And you want to make sure that you're surrounding or you're hiring the right people around the founder. So imagine you don't do the self-assessment and you just go out and hire a number two or a strong leader. Like we talk about at the beginning, like at some point, the role of founder has to split. It has to become a founder who's focused on the future and a CEO, president, CEO, COO who's working on today's business. It's just too much work for one person. Well, if you don't do that self-assessment, you might hire somebody who's a mirror image of yourself. You might put somebody in that position thinking they're going to do all of this work, but it turns out you want to do that work. Like you just are setting yourself up for delegating the wrong things, hiring the wrong person, putting yourself in a bad position. And like I mentioned, I've actually seen this happen very specifically with a founder who identified their successor, but hadn't done this step. That failure of doing that first step resulted in a mass exodus from the firm because that was not done. So
wow.
You really do have to think long-term. And it's not just something you do once. It's something that all right, today, what are the things that I need to do more of? And you have to constantly kind of go through an evolution because, replacing yourself or splitting the founder into two roles doesn't happen overnight. It happens a little bit at a time.
So without getting into sensitivities with this example you raised, what specifically was the issue? Was it the definition of who's on first, what's on second, or was it the personality traits and styles?
Yeah, it was actually a combination of both. Yeah. Wrong person in the seat, and then not great definition about who was going to do what. So there was difficulty letting go of the things that the second in command or the COO thought was going to take over. And as a result, there was just frustration and couldn't work through it. So definitely want to start as the founder with identifying really that self-assessment. And frankly, if you have a COO and president, the president should do it too, because there's probably things that he or she is doing that they don't really want to do and maybe aren't in their strengths. And so how do you put everybody in the position where they can have their biggest impact?
I love that you had mentioned that this relationship between the number one and the number two actually does evolve over time based on what the business needs and what that partnership needs as well. Are you privy to sharing just how you and your founder's dynamic has evolved over time?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first met, we hadn't worked together. So we had a lot of trust and relationship building, frankly, just to work on while starting a firm, which of course, if anybody started a firm, you know how difficult it is to get something started. So you start in one day and you have kind of your key contributions or what are those things that you are so specifically responsible for delivering. But over time that starts to evolve because you can't just kind of like one and done. So in our specific example, on a monthly basis, we would actually go through and say like, okay, here's your contributions, here are my contributions. Is this still right? Are we still, in the right position where we can be most successful? We would go through and say, you know what? In reality, I hate doing this. I've been doing it for a while and I don't want to do it anymore. So how do we move that off to somebody else? Or should we just not be doing it anymore? And it's really taken a very intentional approach of always looking at who's doing what, making sure the lanes are clear, there is an overlap. Trouble happens when, expectations aren't, completely aligned. And then with that, we talked about trust and how foundational that is. Like, we have to be in a position where we can call each other out. Now, we don't have to be jerks about it, but we've had plenty of examples where we say like, wait a minute, that's my lane, that's your lane. Oh, okay, yep, you're right. We need to stay here. So I think it starts so foundationally with a relationship and trust and just being able to have an open dialogue.
I'm curious, and I don't know if this is a throwaway question or not, or how it lands with you, but were there some unique or funny ways that the two of you kind of met in the middle as you both were kind of understanding, learning each other a bit better? I'll give you an example, Jeff, and I don't know if there's something you both did, but understanding each other's personality traits or personality style. Was that something you two discussed to see that, to make sure that scientifically you weren't the same personality, that you were complementary?
Yeah, that's a great one. We actually, before we even decided, or I decided to join Greg and starting Collective 54, we actually used two different assessments to just understand our personalities. So we took DISC assessment and predictive index to understand how different our personalities were and how they would match. And we were mindful of, we're similar in ways, but we're also very different in ways. You can imagine if you had two, big time visionaries trying to start a firm, there's probably going to be conflict. Or if you had kind of two very, tactical implementer type people, like who's going to figure out where we're going? So you have to have some complementary, personalities. But beyond that, we also, we had both taken Myers-Briggs, so we knew how we shaped up from that standpoint. We talked a lot about our why and kind of our, why do we want to do this? We shared with each other we had both gone through writing our obituaries, and we shared them with each other, and we talked about like why we do the things we do, and like what are the values that are important to each other. Of course, we've had plenty of dinners and glasses of wine together to not just talk shop, but to really get to know each other. That I think is really important. And now we're to the point where we know each other so well, we can send, a one-line text message to each other and know exactly what the other is thinking.
That's amazing. Was there something in this journey of understanding and learning each other that surprised you, but in the best way possible? And perhaps it got you over the edge and says, yeah, I'm going to do this with you.
Yeah. I think the part that's probably the biggest indicator is we realize that we both have this kind of all-in mentality. Like once we make a commitment, we're all in. And, there is no plan B. Burn the ships kind of thing is our mindset. And we both shared that, to our core, and had examples over and over in our lives. Not just like in our, like, this is what I say, but this is actually how I live. And that, I think that was really, really helpful to understand, our why, our kind of mission, vision, and values, and how that, how ours together fits into scaling the firm.
This alignment is something that I've had the benefit of seeing between the two of you and Jeff in the 5 years of being a member. 4 or 5 years now, I think I've been a member of Collective 54. But in that time, there's been a handful of meetings that I've called with you, just asking you, how do you stay in alignment with your founder, Greg? And I've always appreciated your insights. In fact, truth be told, I've always seen you as a role model for me. But the truth is, even though you are tight with your founder, there's going to be times of challenge, right? And where as you say, you'll have to call each other out. Without going into the specifics, could you bring yourself back to perhaps one of the most challenging times? How did you navigate it? And how did you make sure that your relationship was intact and unscathed?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's one example that comes to mind where, I mean, frankly, I dropped the ball. And Greg was like, "Wow, I can't believe this happened." And I was disappointed myself. I dropped the ball. He was, of course, disappointed the ball was dropped. But one of the things that we've gotten into as kind of a habit, if there is a point of friction or something that hasn't gone well, we don't hide from it. We don't, we don't just try to avoid it. Instead, I called him and said, I screwed up. And I might have used different language when I said that. And I said, and here's what happened. And we talked it through. And I can remember something that he said that I think kind of gave the open space for us to have more dialogue like that, where he, simply said, "Thank you. I know how difficult it is to say you effed up, and you owned it, and we'll figure it out." And like that type of approach has helped us know that no matter what, we have each other's back. We're going to figure it out. We figured out countless things in this journey, so we're going to tackle this one, and we'll tackle whatever one comes up. There's a great. I was reading a book not too long ago, and somebody was talking about how the entrepreneurship isn't just like trying and failing. It's like failing 21 times, but knowing that you're going to try again, even if you fail on 22, even if you fail on 23, like it's getting up and trying again over and over and over again. And I think that is really reflective in the relationship of partners when you're starting a business.
Greg is such a larger than life personality, but what I appreciate about him is his ability to care. And I don't know what words he would use, but he's got a big heart, and that story proves it.
Yeah.
Jeff, listening to you, I can understand how many other founders and business leaders can hear your story and recognize that, well, this is great. Jeff's talking about a framework so that I can go out and find my own second in command, my own number two, and implement this in my business. And certainly the dynamic that you and your founder are operating under right now is that visionary integrator. But I think you mentioned it earlier, there are going to be pitfalls and there are going to be roadblocks. There's going to be somebody out there who tries to implement this, promotes a number two, develops a number two, and then stumbles. What's keeping them from achieving this holy grail of a relationship between a number one and number two?
Yeah, I would say there's two big factors. First and foremost, did they pick the right person? Do they have those complementary skills that, have different skills and experience so that 1 + 1 isn't 2, but it's, 1 + 1 is 5 type of thing. So that has to be, part of it. If you have a mirror image of yourself, you probably selected the wrong person. The second part of it is really understanding as the founder what you really, really in your heart of hearts want. So if you want to sell your firm and on day one you want to leave, you have to tackle this. You have to find your number two who you help develop to take over the business. If you don't, you'll have an earnout for 3 years and you'll be, in the business. And I use that example of really knowing what you want and how your personal identity is connected with the firm identity is so imperative, because you might be saying one thing and thinking one thing, but in your heart of hearts, it may actually be that you want to continue to be the king of the firm or something like that. So oftentimes letting go is hard. And I get it, because you started the firm. The firm's your baby. It's your idea that, came from a seed and has grown into what it is today. It's hard to let go of that. But if you truly want a successful exit, or you want to, scale beyond, what you believe is possible today with you as a leader, you have to start to let go. It's one of the hardest things. I can remember early in my career, I was leading a portfolio of products. And my director at the time came to me and said, "Hey, we've got bigger things for you, and we need to put you into this type of role. I can see your impact, growing in this role. But the hardest thing is going to be, can you let go of those products? So if I see you let go, I put you in this position." And so it wasn't, you're going into this position and then you've got to let go of these things. You have to let go first. And I remember her saying that so specifically to me. And I mean, clearly, I hadn't thought about that before our conversation today. But I think that holds true for founders as well. Like, you have to let go.
Just listening to your response, Jeff, the word that rings true in my mind is intentionality. And that's a word that you use often too. And I totally appreciate it when you put it on the table. My next question is, how do you track progress in this number one, number two dynamic? What is the best way to make sure that you're succeeding in making progress?
Yeah, there's a number of different ways, and I think it evolves a bit as the firm scales. In the early days where the number two is just trying to take that first thing off the founder's plate, it's like, let's kind of give that tryout and knock that one thing off. But the way to really track this is with the key contribution inventory that we developed to address the founder bottleneck. And it starts with looking at all of those key contributions, not the little things, key. The word key is a really important aspect of it. What are those things as it relates to sales, as it relates to service delivery, new service or product development, and then back office, finance, HR, IT, legal, things like that the founder is doing. And how do we move those things over to the successor or the number two? So it starts with taking an inventory and literally going one by one and saying, all right, here's how we're going to move this. Here's how we're going to move that. One of the things that I see so many people, misstep is they almost throw succession over the wall. They say, okay, Randall, you're taking over sales. Randall, go off and take over sales. And that fails, because you haven't actually transitioned anything. All you've done is just kind of delegate in totality without any information. So it takes that intentional approach of saying, all right, here's how we sell, and here's how you're going to take this on for me. And I believe in this kind of 3-step process that goes along with it. And it's really, it's show. So here's how we do it. It's do. So now the number two is doing it. And I should say, with the show, it's like the founder showing the number two how they're going to do something like win a new client. So they're going jointly on a sales call together. And then, of course, afterwards, the number two can ask the founder, like, why did you do it this way? And what did you do here? And I see that this was a little deviation from what we have in the process. And, can explain all of those sort of things. But then they flip roles. And now the number two is they're selling that new client, but the founder's still there. And the founder afterwards are giving some coaching and saying, okay, that was great. This is a little thing you might have missed. Did you catch this? It's an opportunity, for real coaching and development. And then the third step is just coach. And that's where the number two is outdoing it. And they're going back to the founder to get coaching and saying, hey, I encountered this unique situation. What would have you done in this, particular instance? But that show, do, coach approach is the way to really move those, those contributions all the way over from the founder to the number two.
As we draw to a close, I'd love to ask one more question, but to summarize and move forward from the founder's perspective, it is absolutely imperative that the founder is aware, is intentional about apprenticeship and planning out what those roles could be. So that's all fine and dandy.
Yeah.
But Jeff, you're an entrepreneurial COO, or the entrepreneurial number two, which I think is a rare breed. What advice would you give the second in command, or perhaps somebody who is vying for that role, but really needs to support the founder in getting there? What advice would you give that person?
Yeah, I think it starts with some self-awareness of what do you really want? I mean, I've read a lot of books about, about COOs and about entrepreneurship and what it's like to start a company and to know that, this is what I wanted. I was fortunate. I think I was 28 or 29 is when I was meeting with CEO of the company I was working with. And I told him I wanted to be a CEO one day of a small company. I didn't say I wanted to go, be the CEO of IBM or something like that. I said I wanted to be the CEO of a small company. And he gave me that guidance to say, okay, well, if you're going to do that, we have to build some skills. Like you need to work on certain things. I'll send you off to business school, which was fantastic. And that gave me that foundation. So bringing that back to your question is I've really looked at things of, what is the tool I can put in my bag from this experience to make me better as a number two, better, growing myself into a CEO. And I've had to kind of shift my thinking of career is just advancement and, money and, all of those sort of things. And I almost have it on, maybe a different approach. Like, what's this new skill that's going to make me a better leader of a company one day? What's this assignment that if I can tackle this is going to be applied, years later? And a weird kind of crazy example is, I guess maybe it's been maybe 15 years ago. I was at Sprint and I noticed an opportunity that I wanted to tackle. And essentially it was activity-based costing, as I know it today. But I didn't know it as that at that time. I was trying to get down to a unit economics of measure across a bunch of products. And now I apply it every day. But it was a tool that, 15 years ago, I had no idea what this learning would have for me. So you have to be hungry. You have to be hungry to learn something new, know that you're going to ebb and flow and change. And the sooner you understand finance and how businesses really make money, the better off you'll be.
Jeff, I want to thank you so much for your time. For the business leaders out there watching, listening to this content, if you are sitting there saying to yourself, I need me a Jeff Klaumann, you absolutely do. I'll tell you two things. Check out Collective 54 or reach out to Jeff Klaumann directly. But I can tell you that this membership-based group is something that I hold near and dear because I've been a member for probably close to 5 years now, and I've elevated my personal and professional life, not only because of the membership there, but because of folks like Jeff. So Jeff, thank you so much for spending the time with me.